I never had many friends growing up. While other kids were having sleepovers and birthday parties, I found comfort in the company of my pets. They were my whole world, especially my dogs Sticky and Scruffy. My passion for animals led me to volunteer at the local veterinary clinic every weekend and holiday since 7th grade. I wanted nothing more than to become a veterinarian, but in South Africa, there is only one university that offers veterinary science, Onderstepoort. They only accept the absolute best students, so I've been working incredibly hard to get in. A few years ago, this guy from my school deliberately killed my dog Tiki. I got my revenge on him then, but the damage was already done. Tiki's death devastated my other dog, Scruffy. He fell into a deep depression that even special medication couldn't fix. 3 days ago, after years of struggling, Scruffy finally gave up his fight. I held him as he took his last breath, crying my eyes out. At least he's not suffering anymore. Scruffy's death brought back all my hatred for that guy who killed Tiki. Coincidentally, I was in Pretoria for the past 2 days because I got invited to the Junior Tucky Top Achievers function at the Hatfield campus. I was considering studying there before setting my sights on Onderstepoort. My brother came with me while our parents stayed home. My brother took Tiki's death hard too. He's had a rough past with heavy drug use, but he's been clean for 2 years now, has a steady job, and his own place. I couldn't be prouder of how far he's come. During his darker days, he made some connections in Pretoria where he used to live. Through some careful planning with my two best friends, we managed to track down where that guy lived. He had moved to Pretoria after being bullied out of our old boarding school. My friends catfished him online, setting up a fake date with a supposed 19-year-old Indian girl at the local Nando's restaurant. I thanked Elvis for helping us out with this plan. He brushed off my gratitude, explaining that he owed everything to my brother for saving his life once. Elvis was one of my brother's old friends from his time in Pretoria. He brought two of his buddies along for what we had planned. In Pretoria's central business district, there's an area called Taxi City. It's basically run by taxi mafias. You can't even use ride-sharing services there without risking your life. Perfect place for what we had in mind. That evening I watched from a distance as that guy walked past Taxi City, probably excited about his fake date. Elvis and his friends were waiting. I made sure to position myself where he could see me clearly. I wanted him to know exactly why this was happening. That guy barely had time to ask what was going on and who they were before Elvis struck. Elvis swung the ebony wood club I had given him, hitting him precisely in the spine and neck. The crack was loud enough for me to hear from where I stood. Elvis muttered that the attack was for Tiki and Scruffy as they left him there on the street. The next day I showed up at Hatfield campus wearing my uniform, feeling lighter than I had in years. When the police investigated, everyone in the area told them the same story. Just another attack by a drug addict. They bought it completely. Now that guy's paralyzed from the neck down and can't even speak properly anymore. My brother later told me that Elvis had refused any payment for what he did, said it was a pleasure to help make things right. My remaining pets, Bailey, Halo, and Snowflake, are doing well, though it breaks my heart that Bailey has to grow up without Tiki and Scruffy. But at least now I feel like justice has finally been served. Every time I think about that guy trapped in his own body, unable to move or speak, I remember how helpless Tiki must have felt in his final moments, and how Scruffy suffered for years afterward. Somehow it feels like the universe has finally balanced things out. Looking at their photos on my wall, I whispered how much I missed both Tiki and Scruffy. I'm still pursuing my dream of becoming a veterinarian. Now more than ever, I want to help animals and prevent them from suffering. But I'll never forget what happened to my dogs, and I'll never regret what we did to the person responsible for their pain. I thank my brother for helping make this happen. He responded by saying that the dogs were family, and nobody hurts our family and gets away with it. Elvis chimed in, telling me to reach out if I ever needed anything else. I don't think I'll need any more favors though. That chapter of my life is finally closed. Now I can focus on getting into Onderstepoort and making Tiki and Scruffy proud. Working my first real job as a software developer, I had saved every penny possible to buy my dream house. Well, maybe not exactly dream house, but it was mine and that's what mattered. After months of searching, I found the perfect place in a decent neighborhood. The house owners association fees were surprisingly low, and the rules seemed reasonable enough. I should have known it was too good to be true. 2 weeks after I moved in, a letter appeared in my mailbox citing two violations. My grass wasn't green enough, in February mind you, and my trash cans were apparently 1 foot too close to my driveway. I thought it was a joke at first. When I received another letter in March with $100 fines for each violation, I knew I had to do something. I contacted the management company, who directed me to appeal at the upcoming annual meeting. That's where I met him, the vice president of the board. Picture a cranky old man who probably yells at clouds in his spare time. When I tried to explain my situation about the winter grass and the seemingly excessive trash can violation, he responded with pure condescension. He actually told me that young people like me, who couldn't take care of their homes, were the reason he got on the board in the first place, and that I needed to learn to be a better property owner. His condescending tone made my blood boil. But then came the opportunity I needed. They announced board member elections for 3 positions. I nominated myself, gave a speech about community service and reasonable enforcement, and won by a landslide. The older board members were furious. They made me secretary but tried to limit my power, claiming I couldn't propose new policies, which I later discovered violated their own bylaws. The president, who I'll call Karen, because if there was ever someone who deserved that title, it was her, was the first to go. During a board meeting, she proposed fining people for having non-neutral colored flowers. Yes, you read that right. She went on a long rant about how she couldn't tolerate looking at her neighbor's turquoise flowers, claiming they were an eyesore and decreased property values. When I called her out for using her position to target specific neighbors based on personal preferences, she became defensive. She tried to justify herself by saying she was just trying to maintain standards, and even claimed the neighborhood was like her child. When we voted her out, she broke down crying and begging, but the damage was done. 1 down, 4 to go. The treasurer and director fell next, thanks to some strategic posts on the neighborhood social media app about their overzealous fining practices. At the next meeting, angry homeowners showed up in droves. One resident complained about being fined because their basketball hoop was apparently the wrong shade of black. Another was outraged about receiving a fine because their garden gnome was 2 inches too tall. They resigned shortly after, unable to handle the public pressure. But the former VP, now president, proved more resilient. That is, until our new management company discovered his secret. During an emergency board meeting, I revealed that, according to the records, he owed $10,000 in unpaid violations that were hidden by the previous management company. I explained that our bylaws allowed us to begin foreclosure proceedings for any amount over $3,000. The old man's face turned several shades of red as he sputtered with rage, calling it outrageous and impossible. When I called for a vote, 4 hands went up. He stormed out cursing the whole way. Within a week, he had resigned, paid his fines, and put his house up for sale. Now I'm the president, and things are different. Maximum fines are capped at $400, appeals can be made online anytime, and no one gets cited for dead grass in winter. As for the trash can violations, let's just say we have more important things to worry about. I heard that the former VP tells everyone who'll listen about how I destroyed the neighborhood. Meanwhile, property values are up and complaints are down. Funny how that works when you treat people with respect instead of power tripping over garden gnomes and trash cans. I work at a manufacturing plant as a supervisor, and I've been dealing with some neighbor drama that finally got resolved in the most satisfying way possible. Several years ago, I had this elderly neighbor who needed to put a mobile home on his property. The problem was, his land was shaped like a thin triangle, and he needed specific clearances on all sides to legally place the home. He was about to be landlocked, so I sold him a portion of my land right next to my house for a very reasonable price. In return, he later sold me a large piece of his property for way below market value. He was a wonderful neighbor, quiet, respectful, and we even invited him over for Thanksgiving when his family couldn't make it. He'd always bring his famous apple pie and we'd spend hours sharing stories about the old days in our small town. Unfortunately, he passed away recently and his son moved into the mobile home. That's when everything went downhill. I have to wake up at 4:15 a.m. for work, and this guy started blasting music until 1 a.m. almost every night. Not just any music, we're talking heavy metal and aggressive rap at full volume, with his windows open and bass turned up so high it made my windows rattle. The first time it happened, I went over to talk to him about it. I politely explained my early morning work schedule and asked him to turn down the music. He rudely responded that he'd moved out of the city to the middle of nowhere for a reason and could do whatever he wanted. He even had the nerve to smirk while saying it. This happened several more times with similar results. Each time I went over, he got more aggressive and dismissive. Eventually, I had to call the police. They came out 3 times before he finally seemed to get the message. That seemed to help for a while. He reduced the loud music to just a couple times a week, but it was still incredibly frustrating. I started keeping a log of every incident just in case things escalated again. Then, about 3 weeks ago, something interesting happened. I was walking to Richard's place to deliver some of his mail that ended up in my box. When I approached his door, he suddenly burst out, jumping over his front steps and rushing to his car. As he ran, he shouted over his shoulder that he was late for a job interview and would be back in a minute. He nearly knocked me over in his hurry. I went back home and continued with my day. A couple hours later, I returned with his mail. He apologized for rushing out earlier and mentioned that he hadn't gotten the job anyway. When I asked what the position was for, he told me it was for a forklift operator. His shoulders slumped as he explained how the interviewer had said he lacked experience. That's when I saw my opportunity for some sweet karma. I told him that my plant was actually hiring Lyft drivers and suggested he should apply. I even offered to put in a good word for him with our hiring manager, knowing full well what shift he'd be assigned to if he got the job. He did apply, and he got the job. I knew he'd be on the morning shift, which starts at 4:30 a.m. That means waking up by 3:45 a.m. at the latest. Our training supervisor later told me that Richard had specifically mentioned my recommendation during his interview, clearly thinking it would help him get a cushy afternoon shift. The Sunday night before his first day, I put my plan into action. I let all my dogs out and didn't stop them from barking. All 3 of them, including my German Shepherd with his particularly deep, booming bark. Around midnight, I accidentally set off my car alarm, letting it wail for a good 5 minutes before I found my keys. Then I borrowed my other uncle's massive speaker system, the kind they use for outdoor parties, and watched Saving Private Ryan at full volume. I made sure to replay the opening D-Day scene twice, just to really appreciate those thunderous explosions and gunfire. The next day at work, Richard looked like a zombie, dark circles under his eyes, stumbling around like he'd been hit by a truck. I couldn't resist approaching him. I casually asked him how things were going, and he tiredly replied that he was just learning his way around, adding that he didn't know how I managed to get up this early every day. That's when I delivered my perfect response. I told him that it's hard to get a good night's sleep with a lot of noise in the middle of the night. I made sure to emphasize the word noise just enough for him to catch my meaning. I was expecting some kind of reaction, but he just kept that exhausted look on his face and muttered in agreement. Since that day, there hasn't been a single peep from his place after 8 p.m. Even on his days off, it's completely quiet. I've noticed him tiptoeing around his own property in the evenings, like he's afraid to make even the smallest sound. Some of our other co-workers have mentioned that he's started taking naps in his car during lunch breaks, trying to catch up on sleep. I've been working as a barista at this popular coffee chain for about 3 years now. Started right after finishing my culinary degree. Yeah, I know, not exactly what I studied for, but the job market wasn't great, and I actually ended up loving it here. The pay is decent, my co-workers are amazing, and most customers are pretty nice. Plus, the morning rush gives me that same adrenaline kick I got working in restaurant kitchens during my internship. Last Tuesday started like any other day. Morning rush was crazy as usual, but we handled it like pros. It was around 10 a.m. when she walked in. I was working the espresso bar while my coworker was handling the register. The moment she opened her mouth, I knew we were in for a ride. She started rattling off her order. A large vanilla latte with about 6 different modifications. She wanted oat milk, specific amounts of different vanilla syrups, demanded a particular temperature, had requirements about the foam, and even specified how much cinnamon she wanted on top. My coworker punched in the order while I started preparing it. I've made thousands of drinks, including plenty of complicated ones, so this wasn't anything I couldn't handle. I carefully measured everything and made sure to follow her specifications exactly. I had barely put the drink on the counter when she took one sip and stormed back. She immediately started complaining, saying the foam was too thick and she could barely taste the vanilla. She questioned our training and competence. I apologized and offered to remake her drink, which she demanded I do properly this time. I remade the drink, being extra careful with the measurements. Same result. She exploded again, insisting it was still wrong and questioning how we could mess up what she called a simple latte. She even bragged about making better coffee at home. When I tried to explain that I'd followed her specifications exactly and offered to adjust the components, she cut me off. She started boasting about her years of making lattes, and then tried to actually come behind the counter to show us how it should be done. My supervisor, who had been watching the situation unfold, stepped in. She told the woman she needed to step back, explaining that customers weren't allowed behind the counter. The woman got even more entitled then, demanding to know if we knew who she was. She proclaimed herself an expert barista, claiming she'd been drinking coffee longer than we'd been alive. My supervisor explained that drinking coffee didn't qualify her to use our equipment. She offered another remake but insisted the woman had to stay in the customer area. That's when she really lost it. She demanded our corporate number, threatening to report us all for discrimination and poor customer service. She called corporate right there in the middle of the store, going on a rant about how we were incompetent and refusing to serve her properly. The whole time she was waving her hands dramatically and pacing around, putting on a show for the other customers. The next day, a corporate representative showed up at our store. We were all a bit nervous, but it turned out we had nothing to worry about. The representative interviewed us about the incident, reviewed our security footage, and then revealed the truth. This customer had been banned from 3 other locations in the past 6 months for similar behavior, including attempting to access restricted areas and harassing staff. The representative explained they take employee safety seriously and would be implementing a company-wide ban for all stores. 2 days later, she showed up again, apparently not believing she could actually be banned. The look on her face when my supervisor handed her the official corporate ban notice was insane. She tried to argue, but my supervisor just pointed to the security guard we now had stationed at the store. Corporate's idea, not ours. Someone had recorded her meltdown and posted it online. It went viral in our company's employee groups, and now she's become something of a legend. Every new hire gets to hear the story of the home barista expert who got banned from every store in the chain. My coworkers from other locations tell me she's been spotted trying to get into different stores using wigs and sunglasses, but everyone recognizes her now. Turns out her home barista expertise doesn't count for much when you're not allowed through the door.